Welcome to the Law School Toolbox Podcast. Today, we're talking about building different types of relationships in law school. Your Law School Toolbox hosts are Alison Monahan, that's me, and Lee Burgess. We're here to demystify the law school and early legal career experience so that you'll be the best law student and lawyer you can be. We're the co-creators of the Law School Toolbox, the Bar Exam Toolbox, and the Catapult Career Conference. I also run the Girls Guide to Law School. If you enjoy the show, please leave a review on iTunes or your favorite app. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to us. You can reach us via our contact form on lawschooltoolbox.com, and we would love to hear from you. With that, let's get started.
Welcome back. Today we're talking about building relationships in law school with everyone from professors to potential employers. So first off, Alison, why do these relationships even matter? Isn't law school all about grades?
Well, that's certainly one very important component of law school, but ultimately your grades are not going to set you up, for life and career success or happiness. So, part of law school, part of the advantage of being in this type of program is the other people that you're going to meet. These are going to be people who are interesting, they're bright, they're talented, they're ambitious, and these are good people to know in life. Even if whatever you end up doing, people in law school, whether they're professors, whether they're your classmates, whether they're other people, in different parts of the school or whatever it is, these are people who are probably some of the more interesting people that you've ever met.
That's true. And the legal community, even nationally at times, feels very small. And so you never know where you're going to continue to run into people who know either people you're currently working with, people you used to work with. The degrees of separation, it's not 7 degrees of separation. It's like 2. It feels
like 2, exactly. I feel like almost any other lawyer in the country, if someone came to me and they're like, oh, I need to get in touch with this employment lawyer who works in Dallas, I think we could ask a couple of questions and probably get in touch with that person.
Yeah. And now with even social media, there was an interesting article that was circulating about the power of online Facebook groups for creating new communities. And there are lawyer-specific closed Facebook groups, and the amount of communication on there about, references or recommendations for lawyers in certain areas. I had a friend who was looking to talk to lawyers in Boise, Idaho, and I was able to go on there and basically say, I have a friend who's looking to make connections with people in Boise.
Hey, my co-clerk was from Boise.
There you go.
So problem solved, not a problem. I'll send one email to my co-clerk and you've got what you need. Done.
Exactly.
Yes. Give me another one.
I know, right? It's like anywhere in the world. So it is interesting how these relationships really stay with you, and it's worth it to spend some time investing in them.
Oh, absolutely. And it's not like this has to be drudgery. I mean,
no.
You're probably not going to want to just spend all of your time locked in the library in law school anyway. So this is a great opportunity to take things that you might be already interested in doing and find other people to do them with. Even if you're very introverted, there are lots and lots of ways that you can get involved in law school, meet some people, have some friends. You're going to need friends anyway to get through this. But let's start off with professors. Yeah. Because I think a lot of students find professors really intimidating, but they also want to get to know them. So what can they do?
Well, I think the best way to find out about professors is to just start with the good old internet. You can Google them. You can read their bios on the faculty pages. They've got some sort of a faculty page on the law school. You can find out about topics that interest them. Pretty much every professor is going to have some sort of area of research that they write on or lecture on or do speaking, or they might even blog. And I think you can learn a lot about a professor by seeing what their kind of pet interests are. And that can give you something to kind of break the ice if you also are interested in that topic. And you never know, 2Ls and 3Ls might be able to share some nuggets about certain professors that can help make it easier to get to know them. For instance, one professor at my law school was a brilliant, brilliant lawyer who was obsessed with celebrity news. And she loved celebrity gossip. And so if you came to her office, frequently, somehow, celebrity gossip would be wound in. And if you like a good hour or so with People magazine, when you're getting your nails done or sitting at the doctor's office, you might have some interesting things to talk about. So you never know what will get a professor to lower their guard and really kind of bond with you.
Yeah, so basically, number one, internet stalk your professors.
Right.
And
in a non-creepy way. Next.
Yeah, just kidding. Not creepy. I probably don't want to go to them and be like, hey, so I understand that you're really into celebrity gossip. Subtle, slide it into the conversation.
Right.
See how it's received.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of professors, they're people. They have outside interests. Some of them might be involved with things like student groups, different groups. If you really, really want to get to know this professor better, maybe this is worth going to a meeting of the board or the organization that they're very involved with.
True.
You always have to think sort of strategically without being creepy about how you can stay in touch, with a professor, particularly one that you have now or one that you've had in the past. So this is basic, go to their office hours. We have an entire podcast about going to office hours. Send them email, ask some questions. Again, not every day, but a couple of times in the semester, ask a good question via email. The professor's probably going to remember, oh, this person was very engaged. Participating in class is a great way to show a professor that you're interested in what they have to say. Sometimes you might, if you've internet stalked them and you know what they're interested in, you know what they're writing about, you might actually come across an article that your professor would find interesting. Nobody can read everything, whether that article is about the latest Johnny Depp news or about something more substantive.
It's true. It's very true.
This is something you can do with employers, with people that you have met that you want to keep in touch with. I do this all the time. Literally this morning, I saw something on Facebook that I thought our friend Nathan Fox, who runs Fox LSAT, would be interested in. And I sent it to Nathan, and he wrote back to me, and so now, we're building our relationship. We already like each other, but, regardless, it shouldn't be something stupid, but if it's something like, hey, this is really on point for you, and you might not have seen this, people are really going to appreciate that.
Yeah. I also found that there were times when, I think especially as a 2L or 3L, I would kind of have gaps in classes, or I'd find myself kind of near the faculty offices killing some time. And sometimes I would just walk the hallway to see if any of the professors that I liked or had a relationship with just happened to be sitting in there with their door open. And
for sure.
And I would just do a quick knock and stick my head in. And if they had a minute, go have a 15-minute chat and then walk out. Oftentimes they're happy if their door's open to have somebody interrupt them to give them a break from doing their work.
They're a little bit bored. And even if you literally just wave at them as you walk past and you're like, hey, you look busy, just wanted to say hi.
Yeah.
You're building that relationship. You're staying top of mind. If you've had a class with someone and the class is now over and you're looking for ways to stay involved, go talk about your exam.
True.
This is something that students do, I think, far too infrequently, but just go have a chat with them. Hey, I'd like to get some feedback on my exam, is there anything I can do better? Professors typically are really going to respect that.
I think that's true. Another way that I got to keep up with some professors was I used to go to admitted student lunches for the admissions department. And professors always go to stuff like that. I think they either want to or have to, who knows. But I would frequently see professors there, and they're always happy to talk to their current or former students. And that was a nice way to, get bonus points for helping the school, but also remind them who you are and, have a nice chit chat.
And you're less threatening to them than these strangers that they're supposed to be making chit chat with.
Exactly. But it looks good if you have a rapport to the prospective students.
Exactly. If there's a professor you really enjoyed, I always say take more classes with them.
Yeah.
Even if it's not a topic you might be inherently so interested in, if it's a great person and a great teacher, you're going to get something out of that class. And so, whatever, it's 3 credit hours. Just go and take the class, kiss up a little bit. And this person is probably going to think, wow, this student is so interested in everything I have to say. I love them.
So true. And your school might have some sort of a writing requirement where you have to have a faculty advisor work with you on a writing requirement, which is going to be a more in-depth relationship. And one way to find that professor can be kind of building relationships, finding a professor who has some shared interests with you, and then being able to ask them to be your faculty advisor if you have to do some sort of large writing project.
Yeah, absolutely. You should pick whoever that person is carefully. And oftentimes you have to have a couple of those people, but that's a great way to continue building that relationship. I think it makes the professors look good if, they're like, oh, I'm supervising 3 notes this semester. Here's what they're about. They have requirements and all this stuff too. So,
yeah.
Another option, if you've taken a class and, you've presented yourself well, is, does this professor need an RA? Do they need a TA?
Yeah.
They might be looking for someone to help them with research. They might be looking for a TA. Obviously you can't necessarily demand that they pick you, but it's worth bringing up. Hey, I'm really interested in this area that you work in. If you happen to have any need for an RA, I would be very open to doing that. I'd love to talk about it.
And I have friends that worked as RAs over the summer as a part-time job to make a little extra cash when they were working for free doing pro bono work.
Oh, for sure. And, inevitably, if you apply for clerkships and things, the people that you've done this work for, that you've TA'd for, that you've been an RA, that they've supervised your note, these are the people who are really well qualified and well situated to write a great letter of recommendation for you. So, right. You need to be thinking ahead. If all you've ever done in law school is show up to class and then leave, and you've never gone to office hours, you've never emailed your professor, you've never done anything, you never talked to them, realistically, what do they have to say about you other than, this person did pretty well in this class, which you can tell from your transcript.
Yeah. Also, if you are on the law review or the moot court board or another kind of organization within the law school, you will probably have faculty advisors. And that's another area where you can really make some interesting connections with professors who are really your mentors. We had kind of a staffing issue at one point on the law review, and I had some very in-depth conversations with the professor who was the faculty advisor to handle this. And I knew him already. I'd taken classes with him, but we'd never talked about staffing management issues, or handling and he used to be a partner at a large law firm. And so it was actually a really interesting dynamic of shifting our conversation into a much, a very different space. But it was just a different way to learn about him and his expertise, but also he got to learn more about me in a totally different, kind of different arena.
Yeah, exactly. These people are people, and they have their own interests and they have their own background, and they often have some pretty interesting stuff that they can talk about.
Yeah.
So, I think you want to be smart about how you develop these relationships, but don't be afraid to try to develop relationships with certain professors that you find interesting, because it could pay off in a big way.
Yeah. All right. So what about your classmates? How do you build relationships with your classmates?
Well, there's your enemy, right? Your enemy gets them. No.
Yeah.
No, I think some people do have that idea that, I'm here to dominate these people, and that's my goal, is I need to be at the top of the curve and blah, blah, blah. Whatever I have to do to get there is justified, and if I get good grades, it's going to pay off. Well, problem with that approach is that your law school classmates end up being your network.
Right.
So they're your peers. And that annoying guy beside you in torts in your 1L year might actually go on to do some really interesting stuff. So it pays to try to make friends, but at a minimum, not to leave a really bad impression. So you don't necessarily have to be best friends with everyone in your class, but you may as well be polite to everyone, because you don't want to have, people remember, I could tell you a number of stories about people who behaved very badly their 1L year in my class, and I still remember those people, and I remember what they did, and I remember who they are. And in some cases, there may have been opportunities for me to promote them or not promote them, and I remember those stories.
Yeah. And like we said, because it's a small community, I have a friend locally who was a law school classmate of mine who was trying to get a local political appointment, and he was reaching out to all the network of local lawyers that we'd all gone to school with to help write letters on his behalf. And, we might not be the type of friends who get to hang out every Friday, but of course I'm happy to help him. But it's he needed to pull on that network. And it's something that you may want to call on one day. Your reputation does start in law school. Not to make you paranoid. You don't have to be paranoid about it. You just need to remember that you may need to ask these folks for a favor someday.
Right. I mean, it's rarely going to hurt you to have a reputation as being a decent human being.
Yeah.
I mean, that's really all we're asking for here. You just don't want to be remembered as that person who is actually really not a decent human being.
Yeah, that is true. That is true.
I mean, ideally you find some of your lifelong besties in your law school class, which happens because it's a very intense environment and people are working together closely. You're going through the same thing. So often people will find really close friends, but you also just, you want to think long-term about this and at a minimum, be polite. If someone needs help and they ask you for something, they're sick and they miss class and they want your notes, just give them the notes.
Yeah.
It's not going to impact your grade. It's really not. And it makes, it's good for your karma.
Yeah. And if you're having a hard time meeting people that you feel like you really click with in law school, I think it makes a lot of sense to try and join different clubs or anything else that sounds interesting. Try not to overcommit, but, try and gather with folks who have similar interests to you. It's likely that those are going to be your tribe that you can bond with and maybe build some of these, personal or professional relationships that might serve you later.
Right. I mean, it could be anything from, the Christian Legal Society to the women in law school or whatever it is. But surely you share some sort of interest with certain people in your class who are probably in some sort of group. And, these groups can be great social supports. They can give you outlines. They can give you exam tips.
They can have mentoring programs.
Yeah, parties. They often have budgets, so
more pizza.
And if you're sick of eating pizza, you can probably join the committee to plan the events, and then you can order something other than pizza, and everyone will love you. So there are a lot of opportunities to pretty easily get involved in things. I mean, you can also just sign up for a bunch of stuff in the beginning of the year, go to a few meetings, see what resonates with you. I mean, a lot of these groups will have events, they'll have lunchtime speakers. These are low commitment ways to find your people.
Yeah, I think that that's really true. And law schools do have a social scene. I think different law schools, the more of a commuter law school you might be going to, maybe the less of a social scene it has. But law schools have a lot of social engagements, bar nights. Some schools have trivia nights, sports leagues, clubs and activities, intramurals, barbecues, different groups throwing parties, students throw big parties. There are a lot of ways to socialize. And so you have to think about the ways you like to socialize and then try and engage in those activities.
Right. So you want to do something that's fun for you. You know, if you are not a person who enjoys going out to the Thursday night bar review and having a few drinks in a crowded bar, well, maybe you want to join the multiplayer gaming association at your law school, and you want to sit around and play, I don't know, Settlers of Catan, which is totally fine. It's really what's fun for you. So don't feel like you have to push yourself to go to these events that may not be comfortable for you, but you do want to try to find something social. Yeah. And also, interesting law-related activities. You're in law school for a reason. Presumably you have some interest in this. So you can go to different talks, after classes, during lunch. These are a great way you can hang out afterwards, particularly, if only a few people show up. Well, those people are probably interested in the same thing you're interested in. So, don't just show up and then immediately run for your life as soon as the talk ends because you don't want to have to talk to anyone. I mean, at this point, you've gone to a talk. If nothing else, you can say, oh, what did you think of this? Yeah. And then you've started a conversation. So these are also networking practice opportunities because it doesn't really get much easier than 5 people in a room listening to a speaker to chat about it afterwards.
I think that's really true. Conferences are also a great opportunity. And we've thrown conferences in the past, and we learned that law schools oftentimes even have budgets that students can apply to access to go to conferences.
For sure.
That are of interest to them. And that's another, great way to share experiences or get one friend to go with you, and you can meet a lot of different people and increase your network, but also make new friends.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, this can be, I know like the Miss JD, for example, they have a conference every year for women in law. And a lot of times the law associations will show up, they'll bring 5 or 6 people from a school. So, I mean, if you're listening to this and you're a woman, hello, obvious opportunity to meet some people, have some interesting opportunities, learn something, go on a trip. Because, if you've spent a weekend with someone at a conference, you're going to bond with them.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's just the way it works. Even if you're not best friends afterwards, you're always going to have that, like, oh, hey, we had that great time when we went to DC. Do you remember that? That's what we're looking for.
Exactly. That was one of our first big trips together, wasn't it? We went to DC.
We did.
Ms. JD conference.
Yeah, exactly. And, we're still friendly with a lot of people that we either met or increased our relationship with at that conference.
That's true.
Pro bono work is a great way to meet people. Mm-hmm. You're always going to have people you're working with, mentors, that kind of thing. Any sorts of receptions, symposia. There's always stuff going on in law school. I don't know if this still happens, but pre-crash, in the spring semester in New York City at law schools, big law firms would actually throw receptions multiple times a week. So, if you wanted to go out Tuesday and Thursday night, somebody else was paying for that.
Yep. So grab that professional attire and go out and have a cocktail on Big Law.
Exactly. Thank you, Aiken Gump. You know? Cheers.
Yeah.
Good way to talk. People are sometimes intimidated. I don't want to talk to lawyers. You can just go and talk to your friends. And it's fine. It's like free happy hour, basically. So there's always something going on. And hey, worst case, you can always build relationships by studying.
Yep, that's true. Study groups, are notorious for building relationships, interpersonal relationships. So if you like studying with other people, that can be a great way to kind of bond and go through this experience together. Or I always worked a little bit better when it was just one or two study partners and we weren't really an official group, but those folks did become some of my better friends. Just always check in with yourself and make sure that that's a positive social environment for you and doesn't turn into just a bitch session or
source of stress
or things like that.
Yeah, one of the judges I interviewed with I think it was in the Southern District of New York, actually showed me a picture of her study group that she kept in her room where she changed into her robing room, I guess they call it. But she was like, oh, this was my first year study group, and we're all still very good friends. This one is a federal judge, and this one is whatever. They were high achievers.
High achievers, yeah. Good group of people to pick.
Yeah, but they became lifelong friends, and that definitely does happen.
Yeah. All right. So what about others at law school? The staff, the people who work at law school. Did you ever build relationships with those folks?
I did, actually. In fact, one of my favorite people at the law school ended up being the person who was in charge of running the law review. Mm-hmm. So she was staff of the law school, but she was super nice and we became friends. And we've hung out. I've stayed at her house for Thanksgiving. We've visited each other. Anytime I'm back in New York City, I always go. She gives me all the law school gossip. A lot of these people are in these positions because they're nice people and they want to help. And so, I think if you're not so comfortable talking with your professors, maybe you can talk with someone in academic support or whatever it is. And that person might become a good go-to resource. Maybe again, you might not be best friends, but you're really looking for someone that you can turn to if you need support.
Yes. And what's interesting is I made friends with some people in academic support. Or I guess it was more like faculty support services who supported the law review. When I was a TA, you could go make copies and all that kind of stuff. And then I came back as an adjunct professor and then needed favors from them because I was trying to be a professor. And all of a sudden you're back in a different role, but those relationships still existed. And they actually did really go out of their way to help me. Although one of the funny moments was I walked in and I was dressed up. I was going to go teach. But I walked in and it was final exams. And they're like, you can't be here. Because they thought I was a student walking into the room with the final exams. I know. But then he was totally like, oh, sorry, Lee, sorry. But it was so funny. It was like such a visceral reaction from me. He's like, stop. Do not walk back here.
There's a security barrier. Okay. Another thing.
Exactly.
Another thing I think sometimes people overlook is if you're a JD, consider getting to know some of the LLMs.
True.
Particularly if there are a lot of international LLMs at your school, because these people are super interesting. They're lots of fun. They're very social. They go out a lot, many of them. And it's just a different mix. A lot of these people are coming, they've already been lawyers in their home country. They may have a civil law background. So you just end up in these very, very interesting conversations, where you might have someone who's a French lawyer and a German lawyer and a Mexican lawyer. And then there's you who's a 2L. And it's kind of fascinating.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it really is. And you never know, again, where you might run into these folks in the future. A lot of LLMs stay in the U.S. and work. Sometimes they work abroad, and you never know where your career might take you or your vacations. You may make new friends that will end up living in different locations that you may want to visit someday.
Oh, yeah, exactly. And like once you're Facebook friends with people, you can always just check back in with them when you happen to be passing through their country.
Exactly.
I mean, true. A lot of these sort of casual relationships. Like I remember one summer an LLM was living in my apartment, and we're Facebook friends now. So of course, if I ever find myself in the Netherlands, or in London, I can't remember where she is now, but she was Dutch. I'll look her up, and we'll probably go out and we'll have a drink and we'll catch up, and it'll be interesting and fun.
Yeah.
And these are the kind of relationships that you can make in law school that end up, even if they're loose relationships, they can follow you throughout your life.
It's true. I mean, social media is just such a game changer for that. It used to be very hard to keep in touch with people, but on my Facebook feed, I have friends that I met traveling years and years and years ago that, I still keep up with. And if I go back to some of the destinations where they live, I will look them up and we will all have tea or a drink because that's what you do now.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I remember when we were speaking at the NALP conference in Seattle, and I had a friend from law school who is a professor at one of the universities in Seattle now. And so, of course, I met him for lunch because why not?
Yeah, exactly. And, I think it is also just interesting. Even if you end up relocating somewhere, I mean, I know we kind of already talked about, being able to find someone in Boise, Idaho, but even when you headed down to Mexico City, I found out one of my friends from law school was in Mexico City, and then I was able to connect you guys, so you can go out, and meet me and things like that.
We went to have fantastic Yucatan food, and it was fun.
Yeah, so it's a small world.
Exactly.
After all,
yeah. Another thing I think people sometimes overlook, and this depends a lot on the type of law school you attend, but if your law school is part of a broader university, don't overlook people outside of the law school.
It's true.
So you might actually, for example, business school students are fantastic people to know. Again, they're like LLMs. They're generally very social. I used to study a lot in the business school library because it was a lot less stressful. They were just hanging out, chilling, doing some group work.
Yep.
I don't think I actually had close friends at the business school at Columbia, but I did have classmates who had really close friends in the business school. Some of the younger people made friends with undergrads. I mean, frankly, they were usually dating them, but you're actually in a very academic environment, and you can meet a lot of different types of people.
Yeah. That's really true. And just be open to that. I was talking to a friend, and I know this is going to sound a little woohoo, but we're a little woohoo. It's okay. I'm going to go for it. But she was just talking about being conscious of the energy that she projects into the world, and, about she really finds when she's got kind of an openness to just meet new people that just interesting things happen. Interesting connections are made when you're willing to smile more, when you're have a bit more gratitude about, as you move through life, than being closed off and cranky or, very worried and concerned. And I think as law students, if you can kind of keep some open energy so other people might want to talk to you as well, that you can really, moving throughout your world unintentionally or intentionally meet people that could be part of your story. It's something that's important to keep in mind as you get more stressed, how you're moving in the world, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I was talking to someone this morning about a friend of mine who met her now husband walking to the bus one day.
Oh,
just as an example of how completely random life could be. If she had left her house 5 minutes later that day, the entire course of her life would have been different.
Yeah.
And, so you never know. I mean, if you decide to study outside of the law school library because it's stressing you out and you go to a different library, you might meet the love of your life standing in line for coffee. You have no idea. So, you may as well, I'm not saying you have to go out with that idea, but again, I think your point of just being open to it is good. And also kind of setting up those opportunities. So maybe you take a class outside of law school. I mean, immediately you're going to meet other students who are not law students. You're going to meet professors who are not law professors. I mean, for me, I had studied architecture before and found out that this guy who's a guru of architectural theory taught at Columbia. So I said, I am not leaving without taking his class. People worship this guy. I had read his book when I was my first semester of architecture school and thought it was unbelievable. So of course I took his class and it was unbelievable.
Yeah. That's
I
awesome.
think that can
you do just have to look for those opportunities.
Yeah, and it can give you perspective and remind you like there's life outside of law school. When I had to write a paper for my architecture class in the middle of law school exams, it was kind of a pain, but it was also a good reminder that, there are different ways to look at the world. And just getting so focused on like my law school grades might not really be the most life enriching thing I can do.
Yeah, I think that's true. So even outside the school, I think it's great to stay open to meeting other lawyers in the community. Local bar associations love to have students come to stuff. You can oftentimes join for free if you contact them. And it's a great way to meet other lawyers in your local community. You might be able to get involved in some pro bono projects, or you might even volunteer and help fundraise for legal organizations. There are a lot of pretty incredible nonprofits, I think, especially right now in this current political climate, that are doing really important work. And you might be able to get engaged with them and meet some different people, but also feel like you're contributing and doing some good work in your free time or over the summer.
Right. Don't overlook the sort of non-lawyers too. Like you can always volunteer for non-legal organizations. I know you've had experience being on the board of a nonprofit. That was a great experience. Things like charity fundraising events, whether it's one night or whether it's more involved, like you're going to train for a 10K with your team of fundraisers. This sort of stuff, it's enjoyable, it's useful, it might get you out of the house, might get you some exercise. These are the things to be looking for, not just sitting in the library. Like that's going to get old really quickly.
Yeah, it's probably going to make you feel crummy too. You got to get out and like do other stuff. You can only study and stare at your books for so long.
Right. And that's not the entire point of your law school experience. Speaking of the bar association, like the local ones can be great, but also, I remember after law school, I kind of learned all of these things about the sort of more high level bar associations, and they have all these student events and you can join conferences and do mock trials. And I was like, nobody told me any of this.
Yeah. You kind of have to go out and learn a little bit about them, but it's worth investigating and talking to other students at your school to see if they've gotten involved in any of these national organizations.
Right. Or even just, Googling if there's an area of law you're interested in and seeing, do they have a student branch? Do they have some sort of contest or writing contest, whatever it is? A lot of them, you can really get very involved in a pretty big way by the time you're 3L. You have to kind of start as a 1L. You can't just jump into this at the start of your 3L year. But if you're a 1L, even a local situation, go to a few events, and then maybe they're looking for a student to join a committee, and you join the committee. And by the time you're a 3L, everyone in the local bar knows who you are. They're all willing to help you. I think you're going to have a lot easier time finding work than someone who never left the library.
I think that's really true. And what about mentors and sponsors? I feel like that people aren't talking about this as much of a hot button topic as they were a few years ago, but it's still something that folks feel like they need to have.
Right. So we get a lot of questions. How do I find a mentor? How do I find a mentor? And I always say, well, you need a mentor, but you also, ideally, you want to be looking for a sponsor. So what's the difference here? A mentor is basically someone who kind of explains things to you. They take you under their wing. They give you some advice. And that's extremely helpful. But a sponsor, particularly in the working environment, is someone who really goes to bat for you when you are not there. Right. So, in a law firm environment, it might be a partner who, when it's time to, decide who's going to be partner next, they're really the one in the room saying, Lee is amazing. I can't do my work without her. She needs to be a partner. Right. They're putting their reputation on the line, or, I know that she is capable of handling this case. We're going to give her this case, even though it's a little bit of a stretch. Those people are very, very difficult to find. You basically, in large part, you find them by doing really good work and making yourself invaluable to them. Right. But I think in law school, probably a sponsor could also be a professor in law school. If you have a professor who's willing to call a judge on your behalf, that person is sponsoring you. They're putting their reputation on the line for you. Right. Mentors, anyone you have an interest in. I think, to find a mentor is sometimes people get really up in arms about it. I think a lot of it's just showing interest in someone and then expanding that relationship over time until, the story you told earlier with your professor, you feel comfortable going to them with a more complicated problem that they then help you solve.
I think that's true. And I think when you are looking for a mentor, one mentor doesn't have to solve like all of your mentoring needs. And you might have, a mentor for, your academic type stuff, somebody who you really like how they navigated academia, but you may also want mentors for, work, or perhaps you want a mentor just to learn more about the practicalities of work-life balance or how to balance, family responsibilities in the law. I think, you can collect your own village of mentors, but it's your responsibility to keep up the relationship. I think where mentorship relationships oftentimes break down is the mentee drops the ball on following up with the mentor, and the mentor really shouldn't be responsible for like scheduling get-togethers and follow-ups and things like that, because they're the ones really giving more of themselves in that relationship as far as, I guess, if you would say value, but it's not their relationship to necessarily keep up with you. You want to invest in the relationship to keep up with them.
Right. And I think that's an example of what we mentioned earlier about you find an article that could be very relevant to them and you send it to them. And then you're kind of giving back to that relationship. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Or even just one thing that actually can be extremely effective that I think people overlook is if your mentor gives you some type of advice and you take that advice and you can report back on the outcome. That's actually a circle that people love, because if I give someone, we get questions all the time and I give people advice about like, oh, well, I think you might want to consider doing this. And if they write me back and they say, hey, thanks so much for your advice. I did what you asked, did what you suggested and it worked out really well. Here was the result. I'm very happy to help that person the next time they come asking.
Yeah, absolutely. Follow-up is nice on makes everybody feel better about stuff.
Yeah, and you might think, oh, well, I don't want to bother them or whatever, but if they gave you some advice and you took it and it worked really well, nobody's going to feel bothered if you thank them for that.
No, they're actually going to feel nice about that. And I think we oftentimes overlook how important those little notes to thank people can be.
Yeah, and again, it's not, you don't have to go out and buy them flowers. You just drop an email. It takes you 30 seconds.
Yep. Exactly. Well, any other final thoughts on mentors and sponsors just to keep their eye open? Again, good open energy to meet people.
Right. Exactly. I think it's being open to people. And then, this is a little bit more harsh, but you also have to evaluate if your mentor is someone who's providing you with valuable advice or not.
True.
Just because someone has taken an interest in you does not mean that they're necessarily the right person to be giving you advice. So just something to keep in mind, to figure out some polite ways of declining if you're getting a weird vibe about someone and you don't really want to have coffee with them again,
Yeah.
Because,
no, it's very true.
People sometimes cross weird lines.
Yeah, that's true. It kind of goes back to the study group thing. Evaluate relationships and make sure that they are working for you. So...
Exactly. Yeah. Be polite to everyone, but if you really don't want to have coffee with this person, it's totally fine to be extremely busy for a very long time.
That's true.
Law school. That's what you do.
Exactly. Well, with that, because we're extremely busy, we're out of time.
If you enjoyed this episode of the Law School Toolbox Podcast, please take a second to leave a review and rating on iTunes or your favorite listening app, because we would really appreciate it. And be sure to subscribe so you don't miss anything. Typically, we release episodes on Monday. If you have any questions or comments, please don't hesitate to reach out to Lee or Alison at lee@lawschooltoolbox.com or allison@lawschooltoolbox.com, or you can always contact us via our website contact form at lawschooltoolbox.com. Thanks for listening. We'll talk soon, and good luck building those relationships.